Insane speeds, screeching metal, deadly crashes, massive explosions, aggressive racing games once ruled the industry. I bet we've all fired up games like Burnout at least once in our lives, and if you're a bit older, Carmageddon, and lost hours in them. Words can't describe that pure satisfaction when you slam your opponent's car into a wall at full speed. But among all the racing games about explosions, there's one series that rightfully sits on the throne. Of course, you've already guessed I'm talking about the great and terrible FlatOut. So get comfy, and I'll tell you how this once great series died. Oh, and hey folks, you're watching Golden Joystick YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It all started over 20 years ago when a small group of enthusiasts from Finland, led by Jan Allanenpää, decided to develop games. They called their studio Bugbear Entertainment. The genre for their games was decided right away: racing. Their first ride was Rally Trophy, a simple rally racing sim. Now, rally is a super aggressive sport. Cars often get into the most brutal crashes and sometimes just straight up explode. So this whole dangerous atmosphere of these races inspired Bugbear to ask themselves, what if we made a game completely dedicated to deadly dangerous racing? Where cars explode, drivers fly through windshields, and you can win either by destroying all your opponents on the track or just by reaching the finish line first. Armed with this new idea, in 2004 they released the first FlatOut, and it was a smashing success. The first FlatOut was a pretty straightforward game, and offered just a few modes: regular circuit races, classic demolition derbies, and special events where you had to launch your driver through the windshield and, say, hit the center of a huge target. Circuit races were split into closed and open tracks, and this is where the features that hooked hundreds of players 15 years ago really kicked in. On open-type tracks, you could just veer off the road, cruise at your own pace, carefully explore the designed locations, and forget about the worldly competition. But if you still want to come in first, how about shoving all your opponents out of the way on your path to victory, literally destroying their cars and reaching the finish line, maybe in a wreck, but with your heart pumping full of adrenaline. Derbies were way simpler. A derby is a derby anywhere. 8 cars in one arena smashing into each other until, just like in Highlander, there can be only one. Way more interesting to talk about the special events. You'd pick a car and go launch your driver in their version of darts. These, if you can call them racing modes, added that necessary spice to the game. In the end, players got something pretty unique. A game where the main part wasn't the competitive element or fighting for first place, but pure concentrated fun. Didn't win? Who cares? But man, how fun was it to wrap some stubborn opponent's Jeep around the nearest pole? And all of this to an awesome rock and metal soundtrack. At launch, FlatOut was praised by most professional publications. On Metacritic, the user score settled at 7.7, and Steam reviews stay in the very positive category. Thing is, you could still tell this was more like a quality tech demo than a full game. Content like tracks and cars was kinda lacking, and the career mode, if you really pushed it, could be beaten in just a few hours. So it's good that Bugbear didn't even think about stopping. After digesting the criticism and pocketing the sales money, they went to work on the sequel. And what a sequel it was! FlatOut 2 came out just 2 years later in 2006 and completely overshadowed the first game with its success. Basically, if it didn't have the 2 in the title, you could even call it a full remake of the original. The developers completely overhauled the physics and graphics, added new tracks, and a whole bunch of vehicles. Now, cars were divided into 3 classes: Derby, Sports, and Street, and nobody stopped you from racing them all mixed together. But we had to say goodbye to free exploration of locations. Nobody knows exactly why, but that was one cool feature gone. Plus, the special events weren't just mindless fun anymore. First off, they created special cars with jet engines for them and diversified the minigame selection. Drivers could now play bowling, curling, darts, and even water polo. The fun meter was off the charts. But all of the above wouldn't bring even a fraction of that needed adrenaline rush without the perfectly curated rock soundtrack. Under one hood, the developers packed a nuclear mix of Papa Roach, Megadeth, Rob Zombie, and Nickelback. As a result, every race turned into a gloriously insane free-for-all. Cars smeared each other against barriers, some just exploded, and drivers flew out of windshields, taking aerial tours across the entire map. This time, critics couldn't possibly ignore the game. For example, IGN called FlatOut 2 the best racing game of the year for PS2. Not to mention regular players, they praised it for the amazing gameplay that didn't get old even after hours and hours. On Metacritic, the user score rose to 8.7, and Steam reviews are overwhelmingly positive. The project was selling like hotcakes, so it's absolutely no surprise that just a year later in 2007, Bugbear released an updated version for the new generation of consoles, PS3 and Xbox 360. They called this remaster FlatOut Ultimate Carnage. They updated the graphics, added a couple new cars, and of course, new tracks. Overall, Ultimate Carnage turned out to be what the original FlatOut 2 was meant to be from the start. Bigger, prettier, and more engaging. Plus, Bugbear tried to rework the balance so that racing against opponents was just as fun as ramming their rear bumpers. The developers were especially proud of the new damage system. Now, each car model consisted of 40 separately destructible segments. Thanks to this approach, cars not only crumpled realistically, but damage patterns were almost never the same after each crash. The remaster was successful, getting a 7.7 user score on Metacritic and 85% positive reviews on Steam. Just a year later, Bugbear managed to develop and release a version specifically for PSP called FlatOut Head-On. Of course, due to the console's weak hardware, they had to cut down the graphics and physics, which reduced the destruction too. In every other way, it was the same FlatOut, just in portable format. Perfection was achieved. The gameplay formula introduced in the first FlatOut was polished to a mirror shine. Every car felt unique. Tracks were designed so they wouldn't get boring even after dozens of races. Seemed like all they had to do was update the graphics every year, add new content, and boom! The franchise would be alive and kicking for years to come. But then something unexpected happened. See, Bugbear's projects were published under Empire Interactive. This was a pretty big-name company with series like Crazy Taxi and The House of the Dead under their belt, but things weren't going great for them. Only a few franchises were really profitable, and FlatOut was among them. But even a super popular racing arcade couldn't keep an entire publisher afloat. So, in 2009, Empire Interactive declared bankruptcy. This news put Bugbear in a really awkward position. On one hand, they were the developers of FlatOut, but all the rights to the name belonged to the now deceased Empire Interactive. The franchise was bought by Strategy First, and things got weirder from there. For unknown reasons, Bugbear decided not to work under the new company, and development of the next FlatOut was handed to Team 6 Game Studios. Before I continue my story, I need to say a few words about this new dev studio. Team 6 mainly developed racing games and worked with global brands like Mercedes, Volkswagen, BMW, and Opel. Since their founding in 2002, they've been pumping out 2 to 7 games a year. Not hard to guess that the quality of pretty much all their projects was garbage. The company stayed afloat through quantity, not quality. Somehow, in some absolutely mind-blowing way, it was into Team 6's sweaty little hands that the rights to create the sequel to the already legendary game series fell. FlatOut 3: Chaos and Destruction came out in 2011. This was a real spit in the face, not just to fans of the series, but to all gamers in general. Let's start small. The game looked terrible. Somehow it looked worse than the first FlatOut, which was already 7 years old at that point. And it wasn't just the muddy textures, the whole picture was overloaded. Just barely touch an opponent and boom, a huge shower of the brightest sparks. And during turns of high-speed driving, everything around the car would blur terribly. Sometimes you couldn't even see the next turn. But like I said earlier, graphics were the least of it. The real crime was in the gameplay. Remember how nicely the cars handled in FlatOut 2? How they drift through turns? How the body would spring nicely from impacts? Remember? Good for you. Now forget it. FlatOut 3 had absolutely no impact. That feeling of how you're controlling the car. Cars enter turns like they were on rails at right angles, and any collision worked like instant brakes, only visually damaging the car. Making things even worse were your opponents. Their AI wasn't capable of anything except ramming, and if the race was one-on-one format, your opponent would suddenly get a speed boost after the very first turn. Catching them was impossible. I get that when you're watching the footage and hearing this description, the picture is already crystal clear, but that's still not all. The new game had 9 racing modes total, only 3 of which were unique. The other 6, variations on demolition derbies and circuit races. And I haven't even mentioned the bugs yet, but listing them would take an ungodly amount of time, so let's skip it. Just know that on release day, FlatOut 3 was practically unplayable. No surprise that FlatOut 3 Chaos and Destruction turned out to be a mind-blowing failure. The game got trashed every way possible, and big-name foreign critics gave it the lowest scores. Players were absolutely furious. From this long-awaited sequel, they expected the logical, technical evolution of the already mirror-polished, fun gameplay. But in the end, we got what we got. To this day, FlatOut 3 is the lowest-rated game in Steam history. Just 14% positive reviews. On Metacritic, it proudly sports a 3.0 score. As surprising as it is, FlatOut 3's failure didn't really affect Team 6, and the company continues to periodically release games. The main thing is their quality stayed at the same level, and this should have been the end of it. Rarely can any game franchise recover from a failure of this magnitude, but Strategy First wasn't done. They just handed development of the next part to another company, Kyloton. These French developers are mainly known for rally racing games WRC5 and WRC6. Their scores were pretty average, but leaned more towards 7 out of 10, not 1. But we only saw the 4th part of the series after 6 long years, 2017. FlatOut 4 Total Insanity turned out to be just meh. Sure, it was better than the terrible 3rd one, at least because it didn't look like some soapy glowing mess. Cars handled pretty decently, and the special events were still fun to play. But the 4th part critically lacked that spark and drive that made the legendary sequel famous. It was just another racing arcade with your typical rock soundtrack and derbies. Proof of this was in the player scores. 6 points on Metacritic and 54% on Steam, respectively. As a standalone project, FlatOut 4 might have been more successful, because when the name FlatOut is on there, we don't expect just another arcade racer, but adrenaline-filled, top-tier survival racing. And so, since 2017, there hasn't been a single project in the FlatOut series. This once truly iconic series has now fallen into oblivion. But just a year after the 4th part, the creators of the original duology, Bugbear, released a spiritual successor called Wreckfest.
You might just get to see another sunrise. Godspeed.
It was that same good old FlatOut, just with modern graphics and a different name. In it, the developers delivered everything players loved about FlatOut. For me, FlatOut ended with Ultimate Carnage. That was the peak, after which they just needed to improve graphics and physics with each technological leap. But everything turned out completely different. First, the absolutely terrible 3rd game built the coffin for the series, and the mediocre 4th part nailed it shut. Right now, on the FlatOut series oscilloscope, there's a beautiful flat line showing no signs of life. There's been no news about any continuation. But on the other hand, is it even needed? Classic fans can always fire up FlatOut Ultimate Carnage or Wreckfest. Considering the last 2 games in the franchise, it's become crystal clear that the new rights holder either doesn't understand what game fans want, or frankly, doesn't give a damn. And with that approach, it's better to let FlatOut 2 live forever in people's memories, while parts 3 and 4 need to be forgotten ASAP. Big thanks to everyone for watching. Don't forget to like this video, hit the bell, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.